Welcome to the Daily Dope, and I am your host of the Dope, and my name is Brand. And what do we have now? We have another petition drive in Michigan. It is Abrogate, Michigan, which basically means to sidestep prohibition or ignore the prohibition. And you got to give them credit for that, because I mean, if you're going to basically make any law saying that marijuana is legal, quote unquote, you have to also say that you can make any rules you want, as long as, I guess, it kind of makes sense. So I mean, it's always the dream of people like me to just, because of the way prohibition was brought about and in such a weird way that it still exists, even though everybody's common sense tells them that there's really no possible reason for this to be an illegal activity, short of even like people making money off of it. So, yeah, it's the idea that everybody wants, that are like me. We all want that. And I'm gonna read a couple different things here about it. We have about 3 articles about it, and actually that's 4. Okay, so there's 4 articles about this. And if you look on Google, there's no shortage of articles, and a lot of them use the same basic facts. So I'm just going to root out those out of the 4 articles I got. And I also, not today, but sooner or later, I'm going to talk to either one of the 2 people that I was informed I could talk to about the campaign, and whatever other questions I might have, or if anybody else has any questions, feel free to throw them in the comment section. Probably do that sometime within the next 3 weeks or so, I would imagine. So let's start with this Green Rush Daily stuff. A new petition to legalize weed in Michigan was just approved. The Michigan Board of State Canvassers just approved a new petition to legalize weed in Michigan. The approval means that the petition can now begin collecting signatures. Since the petition is a part of a proposal to make an amendment to the Michigan's Constitution, it needs to get more than 315,000 signatures. And I believe there's that 6-month thing going on too. A petition for the Abrogate Prohibition Michigan Amendment was just given approval by the Michigan Board of State Canvassers. The amendment being proposed is trying to make some radical changes to the state's constitution. Broadly speaking, the proposal calls for an end to all laws that prohibit or regulate the use of cannabis in Michigan. Simply put, it would make all forms of weed legal. The change would apply to both medical and recreational use, and hemp too, or whatever other thing you're going to do with the plant. On top of that, the amendment would make it so that the state could not tax weed. Similarly, the amendment would keep the state from imposing any other fines or penalties for possessing and using weed. In Michigan, there have been steps towards creating more lax cannabis laws. For example, a ballot initiative was recently introduced that would allow people in Michigan to carry up to 2.5 ounces of weed. That would be the highest legal limit in the U.S. Come on, man. We can already carry around more than that with medical cards. So, well, anyway, this is talking about my legalized, clearly. A petition in favor of the initiative has already gathered more than 100,000 signatures. It needs to get at least 252,523 signatures to make it to the ballot this November, because that is not attempting to be a constitutional amendment, so I don't need the 315 or more, but I do have a problem with this ballot this November. I think this campaign is aiming to get on the ballot in 2018. But this newer petition takes what appears to be a more radical approach to legalization. Most immediately, the Abrogate Prohibition Michigan Amendment wants to keep the state from regulating or taxing weed. On top of that, the amendment would also go into effect retroactively. Now, one more note about this tax thing. Right here, it clearly says the amendment would make it so that the state could not tax weed. And we're going to go ahead and read this law real quick, or not law, but this is what the actual, the amendment to the Constitution would look like. And if you meet up with somebody from Abrogate, Michigan, and they have a petition for you to sign, this will be on the petition, and this is all it is. It's not some, 5 or 6 page manifesto with laws that people wrote in Arizona, translated here. This is pretty much straight to the point, and I'm going to read the whole thing. This proposal would add a new Section 28 to Article 1 of the state constitution to read as follows. And if you look at the Michigan Constitution, in Article 1, there's 27 sections currently. Section 1, the agricultural, personal, recreational, medicinal, commercial, industrial, and other uses of cannabis in any form by any person shall be lawful activity. That's pretty awesome. Like the article said, this amendment shall be retroactive. So let's read that again. The agricultural, personal, recreational, medicinal, commercial, industrial, and other uses of cannabis in any form by any person shall be lawful activity. And this is a state constitution, so it would not apply to federal charged inmates. All prohibitions on the use of cannabis in any form by any persons are hereby null and void. Use of cannabis shall include, but not be limited to, the possession, consumption, growing, manufacture, delivery, treatment, purchase, sale, transfer, or transport of any plant, seed, flower, leaf, mixture, derivative, extract, product, and or preparation of any part of any cannabis plant for all personal, recreational, religious, medicinal, research, development, educational, commercial, and industrial purposes within the state of Michigan. And then clearly right here it says no excise tax, no fines, no fees, no regulation to diminish the use of cannabis shall be levied or allowed. Now, in case you don't know what an excise tax is, I pulled that up for you, but basically what an excise tax is a tax that the government levies on the business. So it wouldn't be a tax that the consumer would have to pay at the checkout counter or whatever. This would be some kind of a tax that, like, a producer would pay a certain tax, and then the testing lab might pay a tax. Everybody has a way that they get taxed. Well, this says, no, you're not going to do that. And then finally we have this amendment shall be retroactive. And basically meaning that, we're going to go back and expunge. And, well, we'll hear about that from the person that started this petition drive, Timothy Locke, in a minute. No agency of the state shall receive monies from the federal government or any other entity to be used in the promotion or of continued prohibitions of cannabis. Severability. If any section, subsection, or part of this amendment is for any reason held to be invalid or unconstitutional, the remaining sections, subsections, or parts of those sections shall not be affected, but will remain in full force and effect. Well, there you go. I mean, it's as simple as that. And that, as simple as it sounds, is what they say over here, a really radical proposal to add something like that to the Constitution of the state. In their opinion, I mean, to me, that just makes perfect sense. Like, hey, if you really want to be serious about ending prohibition, why don't you end prohibition? And that's how you do it right there. Now, this differs from the 2016 Abrogate Prohibition proposal or ballot initiative proposal in a little bit of a way that caught me. I don't remember it word for word, but I do remember that it basically talked about, people that are under the care of an adult. Like if you're a minor, you would have to have permission from an adult to be able to consume cannabis or something like that. And again, this tax thing basically says that the state can't tax the weed. That doesn't mean that they can't set up a regulatory framework using this as the skeleton and still have a system where taxes are collected by end users or other people that make purchases along the supply chain. So that's basically that, It's not, whereas the old one from 2016, I think, again, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure that there was no way it basically said that there was not going to be any taxes and regulations or none of that. So, and this one still says, the regulation thing. If you're trying to regulate the use or whatever of cannabis, then that's against this proposal. Okay, so so far the new proposal seems to be moving forward after receiving a unanimous 4-0 vote from the Board of State Canvassers. It can now move into public circulation. Because it's calling for an amendment to the state constitution, it needs more signatures than a regular petition would. This one needs to collect at least 315,654 signatures before it can move on to the next step. One way or another, this petition, along with the earlier petition, could signal a strong move toward legalization in Michigan. And that was Nick Lindsay from Green Rush Daily. Okay. So then we have the Detroit Free Press, who, if you've heard me ever read from them, they're a little bit more on the side of prohibition more than anything else. But this article here is a little bit easier to read than most of their articles. So I'm just going to pull up whatever I didn't read from the last one because it wasn't there. And here's a quote from sponsor Timothy Locke. I call it the Second Amendment of cannabis. He told the Free Press, comparing it to the U.S. constitutional provision granted the right to bear arms, basically. It's like the Second Amendment, but only of cannabis. The legislator would still have the power to tax and regulate cannabis, but no such measures would be required as part of this constitutional amendment, he said. Colleen Perro, a Republican appointee to the board, questioned a provision that would make the change retroactive. Quote, I don't understand what they're trying to do, Perro said. I don't see how something can be retroactive of this magnitude. Just because you can't see how you can do it, because it just boggles your mind, no one cares. You're just on a board that looks at petitions and decides whether or not they can be approved for circulation. So you don't have to really understand it. And furthermore, what you have to do is you have to realize that if it was passed into law and it became a part of the state's constitution, then there would be lawyers immediately working to get people out of prison and get records expunged. There would be people on the phones nonstop because there's a lot of people that are affected by prohibition of cannabis in Michigan. In fact, as Timothy Locke always can be basically guaranteed to point out, since the medical marijuana law that we live under now has been passed, there's only been more arrests because they use the law as a new way to arrest people, a new way to say that someone's breaking rules and therefore they have to go to jail. So Locke was not able to attend Thursday's meeting, and nobody else from the committee was there to address Perro's question. Locke told the Free Press the measure would be retroactive to about 1970, when he said cannabis was first criminalized at the state level. Anyone imprisoned only for state marijuana crimes would be subject to release, and criminal records would be expunged, he said. The proposed amendment would have no effect on federal drug crimes, Locke said. Then you have, back to the My Legalized side, we have Josh Hovey, who is Coalition to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol spokesman, said Locke's proposal sounded irresponsible. Quote, we just can't imagine Michigan voters supporting this proposal, Hovey said in an email. The public expects responsible marijuana regulation that includes licensing, quality control, and assurances that minors will not be able to access it. Now, there's a couple things I want to say about that. I do kind of agree with him a little bit here, but his wording, I think, is a little over the top. First of all, the proposal to me does not sound irresponsible. People's interpretation of what they've seen there more or less is what sounds irresponsible. Now, if we look at the proposed language one more time, you'll notice that they don't mention a person's age. It just says by any persons. So that may be interpreted, because we know how Michigan likes to say, oh, gray areas, we're going to interpret it this way or that way. That could be interpreted as carte blanche, anybody, like any age, any person. And that might be a little bit troubling to some people that are reading it. So if compared to the old language where it explicitly mentioned the age of somebody, and that if you have to have parental consent or whatever, and that's just not in there this time. So Hovey might have a little bit of a point about that. Now that's the minors not able to access it. What about his other points? The public expects responsible marijuana regulation that includes licensing. Now that is an area where we're up for debate right there, because it just depends on who you ask. Now, if you're asking the church lady from down the street who never even smoked marijuana, but she's always had this epiphany to hate it, yeah, she's not voting for this, because she definitely thinks that people that grow marijuana should be licensed, it should be tightly regulated, more than alcohol. And, these are all the people that are over the top with regulations, and they want to overabundance of caution when it comes to marijuana as opposed to any other substance. And marijuana happens to be the one that's not dangerous, so therefore, we got to be way careful about that, even though that we prescribe opioids like they're Pez dispensers, and alcohol, you can have a whole truck full of it if you want. But with marijuana, we have to be careful. Okay, quality control and assurance. Quality control, that's another one that we kind of are the public's getting scared into this, like, oh, if you don't have quality control on this marijuana, then you're going to have mold and pesticides and all this other stuff, or the weed's not going to be what they say it is, or the potency's not going to be what they say it is, and all this other stuff. That's all true, but it's just blown out of proportion. And I've seen examples of bad product coming from all the good intentions that there is. And I've seen examples of really good product coming from Mexican drug cartels. So you can't really, this isn't the best argument in the world for Hovey to make, the quality control one, because a lot of people in the current cannabis situation that we're in Michigan, the Medical Marijuana Act, kind of, we have mixed feelings about this quality control issue, to be quite honest. And it's kind of a political thing. But overall, I don't think the proposal is what Hovey says is irresponsible. He's on the right track, but what he probably meant to say, and I'm just going to say what I would say there, is that the public at large is irresponsible with their level of caution about anything to do with marijuana. And you'll see over here on this other thing, there's a video where they're talking about, drug driving, but they don't tell you that it's not marijuana driving. It's just drug driving. And then they make marijuana look like marijuana driving's bad. So Locke is a semi-retired laborer who has used marijuana to control back pain since 1980. Said his plan would help Michigan's economy by generating business, since cannabis can be used to make 50,000 different products. He said his effort will be a grassroots one without paid signature collectors, and he hopes to start collecting signatures in about 1 week. And this came out like 10 days ago or so. So we're almost going on 2 weeks, and I really haven't even seen an actual petition yet. I've seen some samples. I haven't seen actual hard copies of any. But yeah, that's a monumental task, man. I don't know what the exact number is, but you're talking thousands of signatures a day to reach that 315,000 signature mark, and you only get 180 days. It's rough. It's a tough thing to do. And without paid collectors, it's going to be even more of a monumental task. And it's really a matter of moving mountains, because just getting copies of, I mean, to have no money going into this is going to make it impossible, because just to print out that many petitions and then print more of them because you want to do overkill whenever you do a drive like this, that's a lot of money. So we're talking, if you have 8 to 10 things on, let's just say 10 on each one, you got to have, 30 some odd thousand. I would go for 40,000 copies of it or more. I mean, it's a lot of work, man. And then you got to move those around the state to where within 6 months, you got to get those everywhere where you think somebody's going to sign one. And then you got to hit events. I mean, it's a lot of work. So we're with you on it. Like, anybody that wants marijuana legalized at all, that knows anything about it, will sign this. So one more point about something that was said here. Yeah, he's talking about the business and the, generating business and the jobs that will be created because of the legalization. We've seen what happens with good jobs being created with regulated markets and whatnot. But what something this unregulated might create, in my opinion, is a monopoly. If you have a monopoly man or a giant corporation that thought, how are we going to get into the cannabis industry? Well, we could take over a whole state. Well, which state has the most laid back regulations? Well, look at this. These guys don't even lay an excise tax on you. And yeah, just about everything in here is super friendly to the monopoly guy. Right here, anything that you want to do with cannabis is called use, and that means you can do anything. No limits, no regulations whatsoever. So I don't agree with Hovey when he says, people want robust regulations and blah, 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 blah. I'm not really on board with that, but some people might be. But what it is, if you don't have any regulations, you don't have any taxes levied on the businesses, the big guys will come in and crush it. That's usually what happens. One more little thing we got out of this article from WXYZ Detroit, which is not a fake news site. They are actually a thing. Timothy Locke, sponsor of Abrogate Prohibition Group, said the next step after approval is organize people on the ground. Quote, "We've gotten a lot of support, and now we're getting that support energized into signatures." Locke said, quote, "Other campaigns are trying to do things that a lot of people don't care for. We're trying to do the right thing for Michigan and Michiganders." And I'm not sure what he's talking about with that, but I mean, I can probably guess. But I will save that for him to say if he wants to, so I'm not going to speculate on this video about what his criticisms are of the regulate cannabis like alcohol, or otherwise known as my legalize. Finally, on this story, we're going to look at an article written last year about the one that the petition drive that Timothy Locke and Abrogate Prohibition in Michigan 2016 had. Which, like I said, there's a couple of differences, and I did go over those, the ones that really stood out, the differences that are really like, whoa, that didn't mention anything about this, or that allows for that. Now, this article is kind of like, it's written by Larry Gabriel in the Metro Times of Detroit, and I think what you get out of this is kind of what a lot of people in the movement kind of feel like about it, and I'm going to say that I probably fall more into this category where it's like, looks like the best thing you ever heard of, but is it really possible? What's going on? How is the organization behind it? And let's just check out what Larry Gabriel has to say about this abrogation. Because I'm going to say the opinions I have about it really don't matter. I love the idea. I love the passion behind it. I just don't know if it's going to be something that can appeal to a mass audience. Like when you say in Michigan that recreational marijuana polls at 75%, which I'm just pulling out of my ass, it probably isn't nowhere near that. But if you said that and then you said, okay, what about this? Have the people that said, yeah, legalize marijuana, have them read this proposal. And after they got done reading it, the people that still said yes would probably drop like in half. And I'm just saying that because I'm being real. I'm in Michigan. I live in a kind of out in the country a little bit, but not too much. And quite frankly, the public at large is not ready for this kind of no regulation, just legalize marijuana or get rid of prohibition type proposal. I don't really see it passing if it did make the ballot, to be honest. But then again, you never know. As you're going to hear, there's another side to the argument that it could pass, and people could be excited about this because we're in a whole different era. We're in a different time. Things are different, and let's just see what. So apparently there is a third marijuana legalization. That's actually 2 this time, but this is, like I said, the 2016 where there was actually 3. Apparently there is a third marijuana legalization petition that has been given the thumbs up by Michigan election officials, and it's not the investor-backed plan from Michigan Responsibility Council that made some waves last year. This new one comes from a group calling itself Mich I Can, and its petition is called Abrogate Prohibition in Michigan 2016. This particular effort has been running under the radar for a short while, but its plan is pretty much the most radical of all proposals so far. It calls for the legalization of marijuana without restrictions of any kind. In the words of the petition, the agricultural, personal, recreational, medicinal, commercial, and industrial use of cannabis in any form shall be a lawful activity. That's the Mich I Can plan in a nutshell. In case you didn't understand it, the petition later states all prohibitions on the use of cannabis in any form by any persons is hereby null and void. In addition, there shall be, quote, no excise tax, no fines, no regulations to diminish use. So I think that's pretty much the same. Pretty much the whole enchilada. Now, there may be many folks who harbor such a hope in their hearts. Realistically, most of them don't expect anything near that. And that's kind of like, the other side of what Hovey said. It's not that big of a deal, Hovey. It's not like, whoa, this is out of line. It's just like, people are like, yeah, that would be nice if we could just totally get rid of prohibition, wouldn't it? And I hope the campaign itself doesn't have people that are just basically flaming people on the internet when they give that criticism. And I hope I don't get flamed for it. I've already got flamed for it, within the last month. But what it is somebody that is supportive of Abrogate will say that you say that because you want regulations and you want there to be taxes. To be quite honest, I don't care if there's regulations and taxes, just as long as I can still participate in it. Now, the tax thing, as long as you don't tax the shit into the black market, where it looks more attractive for the producers to just not participate in the regulatory system. There's ways to get this done. All right, so not everybody that is for my legalize is like, oh yeah, we love everything that's in it, and you can't love everything in it. And if you watch the videos I've made about the language, you can tell that I'm not excited about a lot of the stuff in it. So this is where Gabriel talks about, I went to the YouTube feed for Abrogate Prohibition Michigan called Let There Be Pot and was confronted with some headbanging music accompanied by some sort of slideshow streaming images that have something to do with marijuana magazine covers, molecular diagrams, along with some classic motorcycle stills. It's a little interesting, but certainly not the kind of organizational message that makes me think that this group can get it together and run a viable petition drive and do enough educational work to get voters behind the cause. And that's another part of the campaign that I seen last year that was a little off-putting, was that their educational efforts were mainly flaming people in message boards and comment sections and kind of just acting like if you were for my legalize, then you were the enemy. And that's not the case. I have not met too many people that either signed a my legalize petition or circulated them that wouldn't sign or didn't sign the abrogate. I know I did. On the other hand, politics have gotten kind of strange these days, and the Mish I Can project seems to follow the Donald Trump formula. Say outrageous things, entertain the masses with headbanging music, and they will come. Now, I don't know if that's an exact fair characterization of the abrogate people I've met, but overall, the Trump formula is the only outrageous things you might say is the actual proposed language itself. So that's where people are like, whoa, that's crazy, let's try it out, you know? I mean, and that's another thing that they have working for them in that regard is it's like, we've been dealt the extreme opposite for so long, you know, like the cops kick your door in with military might and take everything and throw you in jail, and, you know, you could get prison time for just marijuana crimes. You know, people want to go the opposite way. Once you hit that side of the pendulum, it's time to swing the other way. Nobody's actually voted for Trump as of yet, so this is old, like I said. So we don't know if that strategy works. Well, I'm from the future, Gabriel, and I'm going to tell you that strategy totally worked for Trump. And it's continuing to work against the Democrats because their strategy is just point at the other people and say how crazy they are or how bad they are, and somehow people are going to vote for you. Well, that fucking strategy didn't work, but they're still trying it, and it's still not working. Anyway, let's get back to this. But just like Trump is making political pundits' head explode, the idea of totally unregulated marijuana is the kind of thing that makes the heads of the reefer madness contingent break into pieces and splash pieces of brain matter all over the place. And yeah, that's another thing, is whenever this thing starts seeing the light of day a little more, or, you know, maybe if the campaign somehow picked up some steam and was doing things like My Legalize, where they're not even halfway done with the campaign or whatever they are, and they have more than half the signatures they need. So it's kind of like, yeah, we're all at the same crossroads with prohibition. Like, nobody wants it, but is, you know, if this petition had the campaign and the momentum and all that, and it got on the ballot, you know, would it pass? That's another whole story. It's like I said, I don't know if the public is there, and I don't want to call Abrogate irresponsible, because it's never, ever too outlandish or too radical of an idea to do the right thing. And when I read the language right here, when I read this is the right thing, man. This is the right, it's completely legitimate to me. It's not over the top. It's not radical. And to be honest, I'm going to say this, though, on the other side of that coin, is that there was never anything like this. So, yeah, Prohibition happened in 1937, and then in 1970 it got a shot in the arm with the drug war being started by Nixon. And what you have is before that, before 1937, it was highly regulated, medicinal type market. Could anybody that wanted to grow cannabis or hemp? I'm sure they did, you know, and I'm sure there was absolutely nobody trying to figure out who was growing weed or if you could do it or not or any of that shit, you know. But I'm sure a lot of people did, and it was all under the radar. But was that like what cannabis was and what people bought and sold? No, they bought like pharmaceutical cannabis in a bottle. It was not smoked. It was used like cough syrup or whatever. And so, yeah, there was never anything like this before Prohibition. So there was never a time when, you know, people had to actually say, okay, the use of cannabis. Because the use of cannabis wasn't anything like what this list right here says. All right, that's all I got on this time. I'm sure I'll have an update, and like I said, I will try to get an interview sometime in the next couple weeks with somebody from the campaign. So if anybody has any questions about this particular campaign, put it in the section or the comments below, and I will make a note of it and maybe ask the campaign when the time comes.